Now I open my project with PHP Storm. Before making any changes to this project, we need to install Docker. Docker is needed for a lot of ways. In our current situation, we want to install MySQL via Docker and to pull the frontend up in order to use our API. Download the correct installer for your machine. In my case, I use a Mac. And when the installation is completed, you will have an icon here on the top that says Docker Desktop is running. Now go to the project and create two files. One file is called Docker file and the other will be Docker compose.yaml file. In the Docker file, paste this code. What does this mean? So we are installing PHP 7.4. Then we are installing all PHP dependencies that we need on this project along with Composer. And we are setting the working directory to be /up. We can set it whatever we want. Now this means that we are copying all this code here to the /up directory inside the Docker container. Here we are using Composer install, so we are installing all the dependencies inside the Docker container. After the dependencies are installed, we need to serve, and we are specifying the host, which means localhost in this case, and we are exposing the port 8000. This is really important because we need to know the port to map it to our localhost. Now go to docker compose.yaml. Here write first the version, which is 3.7, then the services. The services are the containers that are running in this app. We will have three containers: frontend, backend, and DB for the database. For the frontend, everything is really simple because we need to pull an image from Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a place where you can put Docker containers and you can just pull it and use it directly on your machine. The image that I'm trying to pull is Antonio Papa 1991/admin frontend. So this is my Docker Hub account and this is the frontend app we need to pull. Now let's go to the DB. First I will set the container name, which would be admin DB. Then I will pull the image from Docker Hub. In this case, MySQL version 5.7.22. Now we need to set some environment variables. The environment variables that we need are these: MySQL database, which would be admin, MySQL user, which would be a root, MySQL password root, and root password root. These are not strict values, you can set them whatever you want. Now there is another thing that we need to add, which is volumes. And in this case would be .db data var lib MySQL. So what does this mean? Volumes connect our local files with the container files. So this is a folder that will be created here in our project, and var lib MySQL is a directory inside the MySQL Docker container. MySQL needs to map this data because otherwise it will throw an error. Now let's add the ports. I will add the port 33066 and 3306. What does this mean? So this is the MySQL container port that is running inside the container, and this is our port, which would be in our local host. I already installed MySQL in my machine, and if I do it the same port, it will conflict with it. That's why I will add another 6 here. If you don't have MySQL installed on your machine, you can leave it like this. Now let's set up the backend. First, let's add the container name, which should be admin API. Second, let's set up the build. The build is used to execute the Docker file that we just created. So the context is dot, so is this project, and the Docker file is Docker file. So we map this service with this Docker file. Now let's add the environment variables. These are the environment variables. So db host will be db, which is this container here. So we are mapping containers directly. DB database would be admin, so we set up the admin database here, username root and password root. So we are connecting with the right credentials from our backend to our DB. Now we have to set up the ports. In our case, 8000, 8000. So we already exposed port 8000 here on the Docker file, but this would be the port in our Docker container. This will be the port in our local host. Let's set up the volumes, which would be ./up. So we set up here the working directory to be /up. Here we are saying that all the files here are mapped to /up. So every time we make changes to these files, we will be sent to the Docker container. Now we are almost done, but these containers don't know about each other. If we run it like this, it will fail basically, because they need to know about each other. So we have to create a network here. I will just call it up, and I will add the network inside every container. Networks up. And I will paste this line of code here and add it to every container. Now every container is in the same network, and now they need to know about each other. One last line that we need to add is the depends on. So the backend is dependent on the DB, because we will use the database here. The frontend is dependent on the backend, because the frontend will need to use the backend APIs. So now everything is completed. This is our Docker Compose file. To run the app, now simply run Docker Compose app. Let's wait till the build is completed. Now the containers are up and running. Everything works fine. I had to change the PHP version here to 7.3 because it wasn't working for some reason. Now let's open the browser and navigate to localhost port 8000. So Laravel is running the same and it's working fine. Open the port also localhost without any port. So this is our front-end app. The containers are running fine. Since later in this tutorial we will build also a front-end, we don't need this container, but you can keep it to test the backend in the beginning. But me, for the moment, I will just remove it and work with the backend.